And yeah, I'm excited to hear from all the esteemed panelists. Thank you so much, Noncebo.
Thank you, Quinn.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you guys can see me. My name is Tyra Malo, and I'll be taking on the rest of the session after the breakaway groups. And I'm glad to be here. And thank you so much to everyone who took their time to join us today. And happy World Oceans Day in advance.
Thank you, Tyler. Netemba, are you on the call?
Yes, I'm just struggling a bit with my camera.
It's okay.
Okay. Can you see me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can see you.
Oh, okay, lucky. Hi everyone. I am Snetema Nkosi, one of the Global Change NFPs. So excited for today's program, and I hope you all enjoy. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Snetemba. So you all know when you're on your laptop, the laptop asks you are you human? And then you have to pick all the bicycles that you can see. So we all know that AI is very, very smart these days. So from my end, I'd kindly like everyone who's human on this call to please show themselves. 2 seconds. I want to see people's faces. Okay, so you guys are not robots, okay? Okay, thank you so much. So if you'll be posting any content on social media, please may you not forget to hashtag youth are leading. So the U is in capital letters, and then are leading, PH are leading in small caps, and please tag at youth at Saiia. Thank you. All right, so let's get into it. I will be sharing the background of World Oceans Day while we celebrate it, as well as the action theme for the year. That's our content for my presentation. Let's take it back to basics. So the ocean plays a very important role on Earth, as well as our ecosystem. And in fact, the ocean can be considered the driver of the systems that make the Earth very habitable for humankind. So as you can see on the screen, the Earth covers more than 70% of the Earth's surface. That's equivalent to 3/4 of the Earth. Furthermore, the ocean makes up 97% of the Earth's water, that is, while only 1% of our water is actually fresh water. Secondly, the ocean is very rich in biodiversity and it provides us with food. And the ocean also regulates climate and provides 70% of the air that we breathe in. So the ocean basically creates our oxygen for us. And let us not forget the many recreational activities that the ocean provides us with, such as fishing, diving, and surfing. So just to give you a brief history on how World Oceans Day came about. So on your far left, we have the year 1992. So that's picture that you're seeing right there are the world leaders meeting at the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil in the year 1992. So this was when the concept of World Oceans Day was proposed. So it was basically a way to celebrate the ocean and raise awareness about the crucial role that the ocean plays in our lives. And then on your far right, we have the year 2008, as well as a picture of the General Assembly Hall. And so this was when the United Nations gathered and designated the 8th of June as World Oceans Day through what is known as an observance. Right, so an observance, according to the United Nations, and I quote, is international days are occasions to educate the general public on issues of concern, to mobilize political will and resources, to address global problems, and to celebrate and reinforce achievements of humanity. So in short, these are basically special days of the calendar, which are a powerful advocacy tool whereby we can promote awareness as well as just action internationally. Right, so what is World Oceans Day? World Oceans Day is celebrated on the 8th of June, which is tomorrow. I hope no one is out there thinking World Oceans Day is today. So yeah, World Oceans Day raises awareness about the importance of our oceans and promotes conservation efforts. It's also an opportunity to consider the threats faced by the oceans and to organize activities aimed at improving the marine environment. So the threats that oceans face are pollution, for starters. And if you are part of the Global Change YPC, you know that for Earth Day, the theme was eradicating single-use plastics. So all that plastic just ends up in ocean. There's also overfishing. There's also rising sea temperatures and sea levels, which of course also means extreme weather patterns. And this is very dangerous because it threatens small islands, the existence of small islands, as well as coastal populations. And then lastly, there's also ocean acidification, which is a threat to oceans. This destroys coral reefs, as well as breaking our fish supply, which threatens tourism and also our local economy. For the moments that we have been waiting for, here is the theme for World Oceans Day 2024. It is catalyzing action for our ocean and climate. This is a quote which goes, by growing the movement through transformative collaboration, we aim to create not only a healthy blue planet, but a more just, equitable, and sustainable society. So every year when World Oceans Day comes about, there's always a new theme. And this just helps get people in high spirits and encourages collective impact during these celebrations. So I hope that the youth who are part of the session actually takes note of this, because I think it will be very useful for our drafting session later on. Now, as we may all know, the climate crisis is one of the greatest threats that we are currently facing globally. And we need a healthy ocean for a healthy climate, but we also need a healthy climate for a healthy ocean. But gratefully, we are not doomed. There are glimmers of hope which exist, such as the growth of the movement to protect and restore our ocean. This will help develop a stronger global constituency to advocate for a healthy ocean and stable climate. There's also improved ocean management, which we are advocating for. This will help reduce overfishing, ocean acidification, as well as marine pollution, as well as collective efforts, which we are also advocating for. It's a time basically for governments, businesses, investors, scientists, and the community at large to come together in defense of our ocean. Collectively, we can hold national legislators and corporate leaders accountable to follow through on all their promises. Okay, so we've reached the most exciting part. These are the esteemed guests, which we were talking about at the beginning of this program. You can see them currently on the screen. So firstly, we have Yanga Muletana, who is the project manager and communications leader for the Emerging Scholars Initiative, which is the ESI Press. She is also the ECP Network Coordinator for the Indian Ocean Rim Association Academic Group South Africa, which is the IORAGSA. And then we have Dr. Michelle Histerman, who is the Climate Change and Biodiversity Technical Advisor for GIZ for South Africa, Lesotho, and Eswatini, which is Swaziland. And last but not least, we have Lindo Mkize, who is the Programs and Projects Coastal Project Manager, and the Blue Flag Project Manager for WESA, which is the Wildlife and Environment Society of South Africa. So may we please kindly note that they will be available for the Q&A session, which will happen after each of their presentations. So may we please reserve all our burning questions for them. And yeah, thank you all for listening to this presentation. I would like to take this moment to welcome Yanga Muletana to the floor. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Nomgaba, for your presentation over there. Tamsin, can I just go for it? Or do you need anything
please
else?
go ahead, Younger. Really happy.
Okay, perfect. Let me just work on sharing my screen.
So we'll go through all three speakers and then have a Q&A session at the end, because I suspect there's some questions that could be answered by multiple of our panelists across the board.
Okay, sure.
Whenever you're ready, Younger.
Sure thing. Thank you. Can you all see my screen?
We can perfectly, and you're very
Okay.
audible.
Perfect. Thanks so much, guys. Firstly, good morning, everybody. I hope you're all doing well. I hope you are all warm, given this fantastic weather that we have upon us. I am very much a winter girl, so I am very happy, but I know a lot of people do not like this particular weather. I think it goes without saying that the conversations around climate change are pretty intense in terms of the fact that it's one of those things that you don't necessarily engage with it on just an academic level, but it is something that you experience. And I think our transition directly from summer into winter has been a clear experience of kind of what's ahead for us should things kind of continue being the way that they are. I don't know if maybe it was just me, but I feel like we didn't necessarily have an autumn this year. We just kind of jumped straight into winter. And, you know, those types of changes, I know not necessarily just how they impact our environment, but also perhaps sometimes how they impact us psychologically, is something that climate change has to do. So I've been tasked with chatting about the impacts of climate change on South African oceans, perhaps having much more bit of a multifaceted approach that looks at balancing environmental stability, societal well-being, and economic stability. I'm going to keep my presentation somewhat general because my specialization actually, when it comes to oceans, is a bit more of an interest in energy security, particularly South Africa's engagement with the Indian Ocean region when it comes to energy security. My favorite thing that's coming up right now with the technologies that attempt to respond to you know, the issues of climate change is there's been solar panels that are built on oceans that provide energy, albeit that it's usually in small communities, but I'm so interested to seeing how far that goes. But for the sake of our conversation for today, I think we can just keep it somewhat broad, but I'm open maybe in the Q&A session to getting a little bit more into detail about the things that I'm a bit more interested in. But so as Nomgaba had said very nicely that, listen, when it comes to the ocean, it's probably one of the most important things that we have in the world. When it comes to the regulation of our climate, when it comes to almost our everyday breathing of oxygen and its role in absorbing carbon emissions. there we go, in absorbing carbon emissions. And the concerning thing that has occurred is the fact that our ocean also plays a very fundamental role in absorbing UV light from the sun and regulating the temperature globally. And since the 19th century, about 90% of heat has been added into our ocean, which has caused dramatic effects on the biodiversity and marine ecosystems within the oceans, which I'm sure Dr. Michelle will speak to a little bit later in her presentation. But really, for my purpose of the presentation, it's to look at the impact that climate change has on oceans. And I don't necessarily have to, thank goodness now, have to highlight the importance of World Oceans Day. Ngobe has done that very well for me, but also speaking about it within the context of World Environment Month, which is, the month that we're in right now. Okay, there we go. So there's obviously key threats that we always speak about when it comes to the impact of climate change, when it comes to the oceans, or major threats that we look at when it comes to the oceans. And sometimes those impacts, my apologies, not necessarily just climate change, are beyond climate change itself and have to do with human behaviors, interaction within climate change. So some of those threats include overfishing, pollution, habitat destruction, invasive species, and climate change, of course. And you'll often see that these things are usually interlinked in a lot of ways where, overfishing can directly lead to habitat destruction, man-made destructions towards the ocean, where we see oil spills, for example, happening. Those are the ones that cause pollution, but also importantly cause massive habitat destructions and damage our coral reefs. And as a result of these changing ecosystems, that can be new invasive species that traditionally should not be dominating our oceans, but somewhat kind of come through. And the changes as a result of climate change can somewhat exacerbate some of these threats. So oftentimes the major threats to oceans are interlinked and not necessarily things that we need to look at in isolation. And so when we look at the global effects, which also affects South Africa itself, there's four really that one needs to look at on how climate change impacts oceans. And the first is the traditional of sea level rises, right? There's a direct impact of that on island coasts and communities. As you guys will be aware, there's a lot of small island states that are coming together, particularly in the international community, because quite literally their land is getting covered by the water, and they're somewhat going underground as a result of sea level rises. There's changing in marine ecosystems where their species distribution shifts. And when species distribution shifts, that might mean that specific species that might be necessary for food security, for example, might be moving away from traditional areas in which they live in an attempt to try to find a place that's a bit more healthier for them. And that can have an adverse effect on people in terms of them getting food. We know that there's an issue with ocean acidification, coral bleaching more specifically. Coral bleaching, apologies, coral itself is extremely important when it comes to our oceans, particularly its role in CO2 absorption, and its bleaching is not a very good story for us. And we know that then obviously extreme weather causes abrupt environmental changes. And of course, when we think of South Africa, we are one of the very few countries, if not one of the only countries in the world, that has an incredibly unique coastline with regional variability in that oxygen, in that acidity, and in that temperature, because we are based between both the Atlantic Ocean and the Indian Ocean, one that's colder, one that's warmer. The effects of this climate change on either side can be quite different. Studies have shown that the Atlantic Ocean is getting much colder, actually, which is very, very bad. And the Indian Ocean is getting warmer, and that's also pretty bad. I think it's great, obviously, when it comes to December holidays, when you go to the Indian Ocean side of things and you're able to swim in that water. But there's some dangers where at any time that the temperature changes, it affects those marine biosystems within the oceans there. A little bit more sad stats, I'm so sorry. Wouldn't be a climate conversation if I didn't have depressing statistics. So there's massive projections on the fact that we could be having heat-related deaths, which would be predicted to increase 25 times by 2100 compared to 1990. There's massive economic costs that come with climate change as well, where flood damage could cost about 14 billion rands by 2050. Although for South Africa, we're somewhat fast-tracking that. If we remember the floods in Durban, which cost, I believe, the government close to 500 million rands. And I mean, most recently, KZN had a tornado out of all things, which has also caused quite a bit of damage in the province. And when it comes to the economic conversation specifically, it becomes so much of a gray area, particularly here in South Africa, because of the fact that there's issues of corruption, as we know, that make it difficult for the mitigation of these climate consequences that we face, where there's not enough proper governance to sort that out. But we can chat about that a little bit later on when we compare mitigation versus adaptation. Of course, there's temperature rises, where surface sea temperatures could increase by 1.3 by 2050. Fish catch potential could reduce by up to 11.2% by 2050. And of course, back to the economic conversation, the GDP impact that climate could cost is up to 5.03% by 2050, which is reduced to 3.3% with low carbon policies should we implement them. And so then, if we look at the socioeconomic impacts of this climate impact, we again have to deal with it on somewhat of a tiered level. We have to look at the livelihoods that are affected by it. We have to look at how food security is affected. We have to look at the economic losses that are that can come about as a result of climate change and are continuing to come about as climate change, and health impacts, right? COVID-19, for example, was not something that was just, a vacuum. Factors like that can continue to increase as time goes on. But in terms of the livelihoods, of course, when we're talking about the socioeconomic impacts over there, we have to look at the fact that a lot of people, particularly in the South African context, are somewhat independent fishers, and they're not necessarily fishing for massive companies. I think the conversation of the bigger fishing companies is a separate one, considering they are often the ones that are subject to overfishing in our oceans, but there are smaller communities that fish for the sake of them being able to make a living, right? And a decline in that can cause for them themselves, firstly, a food security issue, but also economically disempower them. And then the other side of it for South Africa is somewhat of the tourism revenue that comes from it. We think about the fact that Cape Town, Durban, Knysna, Mossel Bay, all of our coastal regions are massive tourist attractions. When it comes to South Africa's economic engagement with the environment. And once we see that going down, that has, an effect on the restaurants that primarily focus on serving foods that are coming from the ocean. And importantly, people who just go to these places just to do a little bit of fishing might not be able to happen in a healthy manner, which therefore is, linked with the food security, with the reduced availability of seafood itself. And so then all the others are somewhat interrelated with the economic losses and the health impacts. And so then when we talk about this conversation of climate justice, we always have to go back to what does climate justice actually mean, right? Climate justice is often defined as ensuring that there's a fair treatment of all communities in climate action, particularly the prioritization of vulnerable communities. And in this case, it would be looking at the coastal communities that often bear the brunt of ocean-related climate impacts. But, in the conversation of climate justice in the African context, I actually wrote a piece about this recently, where conversations behind it are going back to the CBDR responsibilities, which is common shared responsibilities, but different. So we have the common problem, but we should have different responsibilities to it. And that goes back to the conversation of who is it that actually placed us in a position of having this climate crisis, right? And who is it that is being affected the most severely and the most? And oftentimes it is the African continent that is disproportionately affected by climate-related issues, despite having some of the lowest carbon emissions compared to the rest of the continents. And so a conversation that is happening in the policy area is that there should be different targets for the African context. And this also applies to South Africa because the AU was kind of leading in this conversation, where they said that there should be different targets for Africa when it comes to how it responds to the climate challenges, because Africa should not be bearing the biggest brunt of responsibility for it, and northern countries should be bearing the responsibility for it because, you know, they are the ones that push for industrialization, that have placed us in the position that we're in. The only tricky thing about that conversation is that we become the ones that bear the most difficult consequences of climate change, firstly. And the second part of that is the fact that there's movement as a result of that conversation of responsibility should be shifted, or target goals should be shifted. There's movement to wanting to keep, for example, fossil fuel industries going so that Africa can develop in that way, somewhat play a catch-up role while still bearing the consequences of climate change that other decision makers put upon them. And so it's this very delicate balance that governments are attempting to walk a line on. But what I always say to those conversations is, at the end of the day, the vulnerable communities that are directly affected by this and not necessarily caring about what policy, whose responsibility falls where, and need a change to happen now, they don't necessarily care who takes responsibility for what, but action needs to be taken for them and for their protection, for their livelihood protection and economic protection. And often the big part of the conversation that comes in is that there's economic disparities that are created by this, where you have poor communities that have fewer resources to adapt to changes, like sea level rises and fish stock declines, right? And so then this enters into the conversation of, should there be prioritization in the climate financing for the African context, also including South Africa, to prioritize mitigation or adaptation? And of course, as climate activists, we want as much funding as possible in adaptation, so that if the changes do happen, we have the correct infrastructure to handle those changes, to handle the changes of the sea and the weather disruptions, etc. But given the fact that there's barely even a solid foundation of that infrastructure to do that adaptation side of things, often the money goes into mitigation, responding after the fact, after the damage has been done, to try to sort out those crises over there. And so then that's also its own delicate conversation in the climate justice topics on, should we be prioritizing mitigation or adaptation? Mitigation is important for the short-term side of things, while adaptation is something that is crucially important for the long-term side of things. And we know that in the climate discussion, we're playing for the long haul. And so then herein lies the importance of then having inclusive policies in these conversations, where there is a prioritization of vulnerable groups, where there's ensuring that there's equitable access to resources and decision making, most importantly, right? I feel like in these rooms, the people who sit there are not necessarily people who are directly affected, you know, and so there's a call for people who are directly affected to be involved in the decision-making process. And of course, empowerment needs to come through by enhancing community resilience through education, through capacity building, and most importantly, supporting women's roles, especially in fisheries and the marine conservation efforts. Sorry, I just want to come back here to the women's side of things. I wouldn't be doing justice to my career if I didn't speak about it. So if you guys didn't know, women are the most affected by the impacts of climate change. And often there's not necessarily a gendered perspective in the conversation of what does environmental justice actually look like, and women need to be at the center of that. And so, organizations, not to toot my horn in IORA, like IORA, are actively focusing on that, where one of the priority areas that we have there is women inclusion in the conversation of the ocean, of the Indian Ocean itself, right? And so those empowerment moments are quite crucial. And so then I have this very complicated diagram over here, but essentially in the conversation of climate justice, you only really need to look at the green parts. And my apologies if anybody is colorblind. But when we looking at what is being prioritized in these conversations, if we just look to the right of the diagram, the important part of it is, the things that already make up our system as is, which is looking at natural capital, assets and flows. What is the economic contribution of the oceans, the social benefit and cost, the pressure flows, and how all of these things flow together. And a big emphasis is now being put in the environmental justice side of conversations, is being put on the importance of ecosystems and the environment, and ecosystems and abiotic services, and the importance of risk and governance, which goes back to that conversation of that mitigation adaptation chat. This is a very complicated way to say this, right? That often we function in this ocean conversation from a data foundation to move into the prioritization of economic production, environmental protection, and social prosperity. And everything else can be interlinked in some way. But for the most part, those are the three things that we want to prioritize. And we want to see the South African government somewhat taking an initiative in prioritizing those things, right? And so then South Africa is not doing too bad when it comes to its acknowledgement of environmental challenges when it comes to its oceans. I mean, these are just examples. There are so many more that we have. When it comes to our commitments at a departmental level, we have our Department of Forestries and Environment. We have the South African Environment Observation Network, which is Saiia, which works directly in tangent with the Department of Science and Technology, which then works directly with the National Research Fund. At a regional level, there's the Indian Ocean Rim Association. South Africa's academic group has taken a pretty firm stance in pushing data so that policymakers know the value, firstly, of the ocean, the value of blue economies, the value of maritime security, and most importantly, the value of environmental protection. And of course, we have signed multiple treaties on an international level, which I'm not going to say all of them now, but these are just some of them over here, with the UN Convention on Laws of the Seas, all the way to the RISMA Convention of Wetlands. So there's clear commitment that our state has to protecting our oceans. The only question that comes in now is, what is the efficacy of that protection, particularly when we're considering the fact that there've been a number of cases that South Africa has been implicated in illegal fish trade, particularly in Cape Town, in collaboration with certain Chinese companies. Almost done. This is my last slide. So just to say that when we're talking about where South Africa is, of course, this is one of those things that we look fantastic on paper in terms of our commitments and in terms of the work that we're doing in observing and protecting our environment. But there are questions that are still being raised on the back end private sector companies that are functioning on our oceans and the effects that they have on us as well in terms of the efficacy of protecting our oceans. And with that, I thank you. I look forward to the Q&A session.
Thank you so much for that, Yanga. We really appreciate it. I know these are topics that we could speak on for hours and hours, and it's really hard to give a high-level view, but I think that really gave a great foundation and overview to the important issues for a lot of our youth for whom this is a new and very unfamiliar topic. So we really, really appreciate that great foundation. I think it laid a solid knowledge base for our youth. But at this point, in the interest of time, we're really, really excited to welcome Dr. Michelle Histerman, who's going to be speaking from a biodiversity angle. Michelle, if you'd like to introduce yourself first before you present, and then would you like me to share your slides, or are you happy to do so?
I'm happy to do so. Let me just
Brilliant.
open it up so long just to make sure all is working.
Perfect, we can see.
Okay.
Great.
All right. Hi, everybody. It's such an honor to be here. Yeah, as mentioned, my name is Michelle, and I work at GIZ as a climate change and biodiversity technical advisor. And yeah, it's great to talk about the ocean and biodiversity and pollution. And also thank you to Younger for presenting such a beautiful presentation that was very comprehensive and just so much knowledge wrapped in one presentation. Yeah, very grateful for that overview of the impacts. So I'm sure many of you have seen imagery around turtles wrapped in plastic, tons of pollution being pumped into the ocean. You might have even seen the North Atlantic garbage patch. If you haven't, you can Google it. But very depressing imagery around oceans conservation. And basically, it's this place out there, this rubbish dump for people that is often very disconnected from our everyday lives. So I just wanted to start off my presentation by asking all of you, who of you have ever been beyond the shoreline in the ocean, for example, on a boat or scuba diving or something like that? If you can just raise your hand, I'd like to get an idea. Okay, interesting. I think I see 2 or 3 people. Maybe who of you have lived or are living at the coastline? Can you raise your hand if you have lived or are living at the coastline? Okay, not too many. And then my last question is, who of you enjoy eating fish or seafood? Okay. Okay, there's a lot of people. Oh, wow. Great. So I think what I'm trying to emphasize here is that we all are connected to the ocean in some way, but we need to find those connections sometimes, and it's sometimes very tricky. And actually, it's extremely important to connect the science with the everyday. So today I am going to, let me just get my slides to move. Okay, so just to give you an overview of marine protected areas in South Africa, there are a lot of marine protected areas, and something that I will raise later is again this disconnect between you know, us and the marine protected area. It being something outside of our everyday lives, and so there are quite a few marine protected areas, and you can access information on this through DFFE, Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment. But what I wanted to just illustrate is that in latest projections on population growth, we see that these hubs, especially the larger metros on the coastline, is expanding significantly. So whatever impact we're going to see into the ocean and on our coastlines are really going to increase in upcoming years. And never mind the impacts of climate change that we heard about earlier on. So just to mention that South Africa really is a crucial player in conserving ocean biodiversity worldwide. Not only are we one of the 3 global biodiversity hotspots, we're rated 3rd for marine endemism. Sorry. So that means species that are found nowhere else on Earth are found here in South Africa, in our coasts and oceans. And we also have really exciting progress being made by projects. We see there a theatre production by One Oceans Hub that I'll talk about later at COP27. And yeah, so we really are center stage and have a big role to play. in global biodiversity in oceans. There are a lot of policies that relate to ocean biodiversity. I think I have possibly missed some. There's a lot of work that we're doing currently on a coastal adaptation response plan, where we're looking at coastal governance and policies around that. But there are many more related to oceans. And for example, we've got policy for the small scale fisheries sector. We've got the recently being reviewed National Biodiversity Economy Strategy, which was revised to include more specifically ocean, marine, and estuarine ecosystems, to make sure that those are included, but also to make sure that they align with the recently released white paper on conservation and sustainable use of South Africa's biodiversity. All very important pieces of policy and legislation that we need to know. And then what I was also asked to reflect on is this 30 by 30 that you may have heard of. And this relates to the global biodiversity framework, where we have targets that I'll speak to a little bit later. So I was also asked to reflect on the risks associated with ocean pollution and sustainable food systems. And here, once again, I just want to bring us back to an actual real life example and what this means for people living in coastlines. Recently, a colleague of mine did an analysis just after the pandemic on small-scale fishes and coastal communities in South Africa under a project called Bioframe. And it was really quite telling to see that, you know, these are the most vulnerable, our most vulnerable people, and that the impacts of climate change or pandemics just further make it that much more scary for livelihoods of people living in these areas. I'm not going to read the quote there, but basically just it really shows the reality of how an already fragile livelihood can be further impacted by climate change, and that the support is needed. And it's good to really connect with those real stories when we get so mixed up in the data and this looming scary thing that is the threat to ocean conservation. But I think that what's really important is to just get back down on the ground and to really know the stories of people and how they are impacted. And there are many more of these stories. So what I'm trying to highlight here is that while we have these great policies, we're seeing the impacts on the ground, what is really important is implementation of ocean biodiversity restoration. So we need to start seeing the implementation, and it needs to happen with people. So what I mentioned earlier, the global biodiversity framework, this refers to the goal, the international goal, which South Africa is striving for and has signed up for, is that we're going to see restoration of at least 30% of degraded ecosystem areas. And an example of one such ecosystem areas is our estuarine systems, which are connected and are the nurseries for ocean. And so we really have a lot of opportunity there in restoration, even from a carbon sequestration point of view. So we need to, it's by the goals are set, and we are working actively to try and meet those goals of restoration. And ocean ecosystems can be included in this. But we need support for governance in oceans and coasts in South Africa, both in terms of the capacity that's there to implement local solutions and to work with local players to come up with these solutions. So there are existing cases across the country of where we're advancing the policy, where we're using innovative methodologies to engage with local communities, to have local community governance, to manage protected areas, as well as to collaborate with the public and with the private sector to be stewards of oceans. But we're really needing to zone in on what that means for job creation in these areas and for livelihoods as I illustrated in the COVID example, as well as the empowerment of women, which was mentioned earlier. So we want to see targeted restoration of ocean ecosystems. And this also aligns with the Just Transition Framework, which is really looking at social justice, social, ecological, environmental justice. And so that is the potential that we need to try and meet all these needs in our restoration work. So I mentioned earlier that we do have some very exciting, incredible stories of hope and impact in the ocean conservation space. I've just come across two that I really am inspired by. The one is the One Ocean Hub's Amphitheatre. And I'm going to put those links to these videos, which I'd really love you all to go and watch. Very inspiring. The important thing here that I want to say is that as scientists or technical people, and even young professionals who are interested in oceanography, marine science, engineering, we need those sciences. We need people who are strong in those sciences and who are able to do that in a way that also means that they are able to connect with people and able to connect your scientific technical knowledge with people's culture, with what's important and what matters to them most. What is their everyday connection to the science that you are trying to share or work with? And also to learn to listen, to come up with solutions with people. And what I really love about the amphitheatre work is how there is this connection to culture. And the ocean is not this thing that's out there. It's something that is connected to our histories and to our ancestors. So it brings up for me when I did my master's many years ago, and I did it in the Manguzi and Mabazwan area, which is in northern Zululand area. I was looking at rural schools and how they were using learning materials that were developed by an ocean conservation project. And what was fascinating to me is that there were these scientists bringing this knowledge, this scientific knowledge. Most of the teachers and most of the learners were either living in a marine protected area or just outside, but had never been in the ocean, had no connection to the ocean in terms of what was being taught in these materials. And it just really made it very obvious to me that, we have to make sure that marine and coastal knowledge, the holding power is not outside the people's control and their everyday practice. We need to somehow find those connections to people. And so there's other projects as well. Wild Oceans is also doing some great stuff. We see the Ocean Stewards project. We see young professionals really getting involved in the science there. But I really think that we have a lot going on in pieces that's quite disconnected from each other. And it would be really great to have a common understanding of what are the different initiatives in South Africa and who can we be learning from, and can we have cross-learning between these impact stories? So what I would appreciate everyone to do is I'm going to put it in the chat. I'm going to put the link in the chat, but I would like you to either scan the QR code or click the link. I'm just going to go out quickly so that I can put this in the chat. I would like to hear from you if you know any stories of hope or any examples of impactful work. It can be connected to ocean-based conservation, or it could potentially be connected to more oceans work and ocean biodiversity work. But it would be really great to hear from you. I mean, I've just mentioned two, and I know that there's a lot more. I'm going to just put it here, the link. So I would appreciate it if you could please click on the link, or I'll type the code. You can go to menti.com. And I'm going to see if we've got some more examples coming up. let's see if it works. I'm going to stop sharing for a second, if that's okay, and just go to my Menti so that I can share. Oh, I'm already seeing some. Let me share my screen again. Okay, let's see our results. Oh, sorry guys, I haven't been on Menti in a while. Okay, so I see someone mentioned the Neisner Basin project. That's great. I'd love to find out more about that. It's nice for us to know about these different projects that were going on. We were recently approached about potential inclusion in an international project that was looking at different case studies. And, you know, there's all these pieces of work and amazing champions all over the country. But it would be really nice to know about them. And also for you as young professionals, those of you who are entering into the space, to know where to go, who to network with, what are the potential work opportunities as well. So if you aren't able to do it now, if you can please keep on doing that, and then I will happily share my slides with all of you so that you have those links. I'm going to pop them in the chat over the course of today, and then I'll share these slides and share this overview of the different kinds of projects that are out there, and stories of hope, so that we can look at the positive and the hopeful opportunities in the ocean biodiversity conservation space. So thank you very much. I appreciate the time, and I look forward to chatting to all of you further in the future.
Thank you so much, Michelle. We really appreciate that. And I think it really brought a different angle to this conversation, which I appreciate. And it was so nice to see all the other comments coming in there now in your Menti. I see you've got a few more responses than just the Neisner one, which is great. So we really do implore you to please fill those out, and we'll put a reminder at the end of the session as well in case you've thought of any since then. We are running a little bit over time, so I'm going to ask if you have any urgent questions. Can we pop them in the chat in the meantime so that our panelists can have a chance to see them? So if you have any questions, now's a great time to put them into that chat box. But in the meantime, we'd love to welcome Linda Mkize, who's coming from WESA and here to speak to us about the Blue Flag program. I don't know if anyone's heard of it, but really excited to be introduced to our guest speaker and to hear more about the program. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Because it's still morning. Good morning, everyone. And yeah, thank you so much for having me. It really is a very fruitful conversation that we're having. Definitely a lot of information that also comes across from the different programs that we work on. And of course, the different speakers really, I think, highlighted a lot of our work that we do already. So just give me a moment to just check my, to share my screen. Can you see my screen? Not yet.
Not yet.
Just 1 second for me. Oh, can you see it now?
Yes, it's busy sharing. I'll tell you. Perfect. We can see it.
Awesome. Okay,
perfect. Thank you.
Before I begin with the presentation, yeah, it's quite a long one. Hence, I thought, yeah, time is always against everything that we do. But obviously, for the benefit of time, I'll just really highlight the work we do with the South African Blue Flag program to the context of what we're here for today. So with a raise of hands, who's been to a Blue Flag beach before? 2, 3, 4. Only 4 people. Wow, you guys are missing out. Yeah, definitely only 4 people. We really need to do a lot of work there. So basically, for those who haven't been on a blue flag beach, one, you are missing out. It's think of it as a think of it quality. We love quality. We love being in an environment where we feel safe, in an environment where we feel like we are appreciated, in a clean environment, and as well as in an environment where you want to invite others to be in that particular environment. So basically fun in the sea. In different settings, in sporting settings, in you know, locally benefiting those particular communities. But generally, when we look at blue flag, we look at it from a blue flag and I mean, in a tourism perspective. But blue flag is more than that. Okay, so what is the importance of blue flag? So pure water, clean coast, safety, and access for all. So all of this is what blue flag globally is speaking about. Internationally, blue flag, we have over 500 sites in 51 countries across the world. And blue flag obviously contributing to the sustainable development goals. And yeah, looking at so many things that already the other panelists have spoken about, but also including inequality, addressing unemployment, health threats, depletion to natural resources, and basically environmental degradation. I will be obviously whizzing through some of this presentation because I got a lot of slides and time is obviously against us. But so then how do we maintain those beaches and keep them as key tourist destinations? How do you basically market your top class beaches and coastal areas and tourism operators? Like, who has, I know this isn't one of those famous brands, but who can tell me or who has seen this watch before? Or would it be something that any of you would buy? Anybody, just quickly. Or would you like to have one of this watch? Okay, the silence means no. But then who recognizes this watch and who would like? If I would offer you to buy either of this, which one would you basically want? Between the two?
The Rolex.
Of course, Rolex. So basically, when we look at blue flag beaches are the Rolex of the oceans. You get a normal beach, not to say something is wrong, but we look at obviously the quality that it possesses. All right. So I'll just give you a background, a brief background of what blue flag comes from, or where blue flag comes from. Okay. Basically, our oceans face serious challenges due to unsustainable utilization of resources, pollution, and climate change, as mentioned before. Marine life in these waters struggle to survive as our coastlines battle plastic pollution and environmental damage. WESA is dedicated to making a positive impact to actively work to preserve its coastal ecosystem through our Blue Flag program and Blue Coast program. Okay, basically Blue Flag is by the Foundation of Environmental Education, and those who know, who has worked with some of the programs, which include LEAF, and as well as Young Reporters for the Environment. It's basically developed to improve management of coastal areas, and Blue Flag WESA is the national coordinator of this program. So how this works is basically Blue Flag Global is a structure that a lot of beaches or countries are actually affiliated to that. And WESA is responsible for the international, for the national audit of these beaches through the application and monitoring of all the beaches. Okay. And then we have what we call the national jury, which is made out of these members, including Department of Environmental Affairs, which is now DFFE, and some of them you may be familiar with them. Okay. Importantly, the national jury members are the ones that actually also evaluate which beaches should be on the program based on what the application was. Okay. And then obviously the whole members of the national jury agree to say that, hey, we got, for example, 47 beaches that we deem fit to be part of the program. And then what Western National does is actually take it up to the international jury for more evaluations. So it's actually quite strict in terms of how we look at like beaches and decide on them. Okay, I'll just whiz through, obviously. 2023-24 season, we had 47 sites, 23 pilots, 7 boats, and 4 marinas. So basically, the marinas are made out of the list, as you can see, with the sustainable boats. You're more than welcome to get onto our website and as well as Instagram and check out the different sites and the work that we do with them. Okay, so very importantly, a lot of people know Blue Flag as just only beaches, but as mentioned, as you saw earlier, that we have the sustainable boats and as well as marinas, who also is a requirement that we need to carry out the sustainability practices in terms of what we do or what the particular sites do in terms of environmental education and information, good sound environmental practices, safety and services, and of course, social responsibility. Tourism basically is a draw card for Blue Flag. So environmental education is very important when we look at the criteria. As you may know, we have 23 stringent criteria that a beach and the other components need to abide by. Okay, environmental management. Really, when we look at the water quality element, when we look at the land, when we look at the land use zones in the application that we enforce when beaches are applying, we require strict documentation to really strengthen that particular site's application into the program. So environmental management means that the beaches or the municipalities that voluntarily apply need to have all these important documentations and development plans in place for the site to be actually considered. So yeah, and then of course the safety and services. When you look at your lifeguards, law enforcement, the police, and such like. Not leaving out, of course, water quality, of which that's one of the biggest threats that we have in South Africa right now. Hence, we are here. The water quality element of a Blue Flag Beach means that it's either the accreditation will be given or it will not be given, because ultimately you want to have clean, safe water. Okay. So what examples do we look for when we do these assessments of these beaches? Okay. For example, the dangers. We try by all means to eliminate the dangers that clients or visitors will be exposed to. Also the environment, rain, spilling, the infrastructure component. We look at the land, of course, boundary, the collapsing of the wall. And this also applies to the infrastructure. Obviously signage, because very importantly, signage is a big component of a Blue Flag beach. And of course, as mentioned, water quality, and it needs to be displayed. Very important for the visitors that actually come to those sites, that we need to, as you'd want to visit a site, you want to know what type of water are you getting yourself into. So it's very important for a particular site to display the information. Okay, but it cuts more than that. Blue Flag is actually able to I wouldn't say to really monitor and advocate, or rather get the municipalities really stuck in terms of coastal management of their beaches, in terms of bringing the authorities into account if there has been any irregularities across that beach, meaning that we remove the flag if there is any issues that can't be mitigated, especially pollution that affect the water quality or actually the beach. And the benefits, basically looking at revenue generation, the more you spend on really looking after your particular sites, from upgrading sewage and really stopping sewage leaks, really also means that a particular beach can invite more tourism into that particular area, because you have visitors that only visit blue flag beaches, and really the sites means that they are better managed from a tourism perspective. Okay. And yeah, coastal rehabilitation means improved accessibility, and as well as when you look at, how, for example, tourism in these coastal areas, there's a different number of reasons why people would want to go to the beach. Others would want to swim. Obviously, others would want to fish, and obviously others really haven't been into these coastal areas. So the importance of having these coastal areas in pristine and sustainable sites, we want people basically to really enjoy the particular sites, and really Blue Flag advocates for that as well. So yeah, monetary wise, it's always beneficial for Blue Flag sites because hotels benefit, the local economy benefits, and more other services that we look at that actually sprouts around the Blue Flag sites really benefits from having Blue Flag sites. So yeah, not to speak less of access for everyone, meaning universally accessible. People with disabilities would try, it's mandatory for them to also be accommodated in such spaces. And Blue Flag really is one of that all sites that are Blue Flag, at least one of your sites has to be accredited and accessible for people with disabilities. Okay. And yeah, I'll just whiz through these as well. Improved security. It was really assuring to find that the interventions now adopted in terms of improved beach security in municipalities like George, where they use drones to monitor people that have issues in the water, where lifeguards can't access them quickly, able to deploy a drone and get a life jacket onto that particular person drowning, and obviously supporting high rescue missions. So it's also good that you see that AI is coming into that space again. So yeah, with the employment benefits there as well, you're getting programs like the Tourism Blue Flag program with youth development, and also introducing youth in terms of being employed in the green and blue economy. So yeah, there's a lot of youth development and local and economic opportunities that are coming up from this project alone. Yeah, as mentioned a lot, environmental education. I think this is one thing that really needs to come across and cut across when you look at our sites. People really need to know, and environmental education is basically the best to put out the sites. And as mentioned with the other speakers, there's been a lot of issues that our sites in South Africa are facing. But the biggest one that we need is community participation. We really need people to speak out, and we really need people to, come with us in this journey to advocate for environmental justice. Um, you know, I couldn't say more from what the other speakers have said, but definitely our oceans face serious challenges due to unsustainable utilization of resources, pollution, and climate change. Marine life is in these waters struggle to survive as our coastline battle plastic pollution and environmental damage. So WESA is dedicated to making a positive impact by actively working to preserve coastal ecosystems through the Blue Flag Anchoring program. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Lindor. It is so, so wonderful to hear the on-the-ground work that's being done and for people to understand that there are success stories and that South Africa is in many ways leading this. So it's really great to have heard that. And I think we've all gotten a very different perspective from each of our speakers, which we appreciate. So thank you so much to each of our speakers. We really appreciate your time. I see we do have some clapping of hands going on, and I see we already have questions coming into our chat. So I'm going to hand back to our NFPs who are going to guide us through a quick Q&A session, after which we'll have a quick break and then go into planning for the article. So over to you.
Thank you so much, Tamsin. Also, thank you so much to all our special guests today for the informative session. And yeah, it was a lot of information, but it was worth it. And this is what we had gathered here all today so that we know how to proceed and move forward as the youth, because the youth also plays a major part in shaping our tomorrow. So yeah, let's quickly go into the chat box. So we have two questions. Okay, we're getting more questions. But two questions from Kuto. The first one is, how can we support sustainable blue economies and responsible ocean management? So I think between Lindo Hushle and Dr. Michelle, I think that one goes over to you. And then the second one, it is, what role do oceans play in the global carbon cycle? And how can we better understand this relationship? So this one goes out to Yana. You can pop in should you wish to answer.
Can I answer the first one? Sorry. How can we support sustainable blue economies and responsible ocean management? I think the biggest one for us as Blue Flag, or rather as a person who lives in the coastal community, is information. I think the more information, the right and correct information in terms of what it means to have a sustainable city, a sustainable town, a sustainable space and spaces and areas. It means that the local community needs to be equipped to know. And by doing so, you have for example, you have a program that is a draw card that invites people to come and visit that particular town, for example. Then it means if you have an equipped society who know how to better protect their environment, that means there's constantly going to be an influx of people who want to also experience the beauty or the nature of that particular area. And by doing that, you are gradually supporting that sustainability culture in your community. And it may start small, but the constant support of your local role players, and I always say this to youth, that we often don't speak up about it much even in our own social spaces. But by even inviting your own family members, let's start talking about it first. Let it be something that's common. because we only get to hear about such things when we meet like this or in these rooms or when we meet in different centers or during workshops. But at our household level, it's something that we really don't speak about, but we always talk about it when we want to complain about something. So let's really shout about it when you have to, when in our communities it's not happening. Yeah, that's all. I'll stop there for now.
All right, thank you, Linda Gushle. I saw Dr. Michelle also wanted to pop in to add to that.
Yeah, just in response to the question around the global carbon cycle and the ocean's role, I popped something in there, just an image that shows. So often, not only the ocean, but connected ecosystems like mangroves and estuaries, they act as these carbon sinks. And they really have a lot of opportunity for us in South Africa to explore the potential of carbon credits. How can we restore these ecosystems and create jobs and also create carbon, strengthen these carbon sinks? So there's a lot of opportunity around that. GIZ in the Bioframe project explored and prioritized where would be the best sites to be blue economy sort of sites of restoration. So we now need to do that restoration. So we prioritize, we know where to work, we now just have to get the financing in play to start to do that restoration work. So I think that takes the question on the global carbon cycle to to start to explore what we can actually do with that, with our knowledge of that. Yeah, thanks.
All right, thank you, Dr. Michelle and Linda Gushle. Yanga, would you like to add to that, or do we proceed?
No, I think that was fine. I think I'll tackle my two questions that I see here on the chat for me. Kanisile, thank you so much for your question and asking what I meant by women being the most affected. Sorry, I'm affected by the sun right now. I'm sure I'm moved. There we go. Okay. So there's a number of ways that women are affected, and it stems from quite a few factors, from social, economic, and cultural factors. If we just look at statistics, about 70% of the about 1.3 billion people living in conditions of poverty are women, and 40% of the poorest households are headed by women, and women predominate in the world's food production, about 50 to 80%, but they own less than 10% of the land. So that's just from a statistical perspective, firstly, on how poverty can have a direct relation. But the second part that I think is important on the direct relation between climate change and women is women represent a high percentage of poor communities that are highly dependent on local natural resources for their own livelihood, particularly in rural areas where they shoulder a massive responsibility for household water supply and energy, for cooking and heating, as well as for food security. And so then you can just imagine that if a catastrophe strikes as a result of climate change, where a natural disaster happens, how that directly affects them. More than that, if we think about the fact that the rural population has been decreasing in the last decades, primarily because the land has not been arid enough for people to be able to work on, a lot of the times it's the women that are moving away from that, often into urban areas where they become even poorer there. And so then they've been displaced as a result of climate change and have to move towards urban areas where they attempt to try to find a job, but the market is not open for them there either. And so then the conversation becomes about climate migration, which is something completely different. Maybe times when we can arrange something to discuss that a little bit more so, and the impacts that climate migration has on women significantly. And so then overall, I would say that women have limited access to control and to access the environment and services, and they have somewhat are less able to confront. They don't have the tools to confront climate change. Often if a natural disaster strikes, for example, I'll put a link on the chat a little bit later on that shows how it affects women, particularly in Somaliland, for example. When a drought strikes over there, often the men are the ones that are told to move away. To try and find a job and to help out back home. And the women are the ones that are left behind in that disaster itself. And so those are the conversations we talk about when we say that women are highly affected by issues of climate change. And then I hope that answers that question. And then there was a question over here by, I'm so sorry if I don't pronounce this name correctly, Quince, I hope that's correct. You had a question on, so what would you say would be something you would really galvanize women on the ground to be more proactive about climate justice? I think the most important thing, at least that we are advocating for, especially in education, about climate justice to begin with. And oftentimes people think that this education is an education of just coming and reiterating these are the, you know, the chaoses and the destruction that comes with climate change, and we come in with these massive scientific terms and we say, you know, all these things, where you will find in these communities that there's already somewhat of an indigenous knowledge of our environment around us is already changing, and so you need to meet people where they're at. It'll go to something like my gran who lives in the Eastern Cape, right? And, you know, in our rural village over there, she might not necessarily call it climate change, but she'll definitely say there's something changing in the air and there's something different. And we can feel it because of how the animals are reacting in the kraal, or how long the chickens are, you know, popping out eggs or something to that effect. So there's already just somewhat of an understanding that something's different that's going on and something is changing. And so then the most important thing is in the education conversations, there needs to be a somewhat meeting halfway of saying, well, this is the scientific knowledge, and how can we meet together with the indigenous knowledge that you know, if that makes sense. And so I think listening to the stories of change, stories of impact is highly important. And then the second thing is education, but not education in terms of a condescending education, childlike education. It's more of an education of, I want to equip you with the tools now and how you can, you know, move forward with this crisis. So yeah, that's how I would answer those two questions.
All right, thank you so much for that, Yanga, and also thank you to the entire panel. Judging by the time, we unfortunately have to move on, but I'd like to ask if could you all please respond to the questions which are here on the chat. So if you have any responses to the questions on the chat, please may you respond to them. And yeah, that's for me. Thank you so much for availing yourself this morning. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And Yanga, I just wanted to flag that also in partnership with GIZ and the ICI project, we are going to be hosting a virtual webinar in August. I believe it's the 6th of August, just before National Women's Day, where we're going to delve into the intersection between climate and gender, because we know that really is a serious problem. I know GIZ does have a gender working group where they look at that intersection. So we are going to be having a youth-focused virtual dialogue on gender and climate, and we'd love for you to be involved. So if that's something you're interested in, we'll definitely extend the invite. Thank you.
Sure, sounds good.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you once again to our panelists. We really appreciate it. If you could answer any of those additional questions in the chat, that would be useful. For now, we're going to take a very quick 5-minute body break for all our participants. And when we come back, we're going to move into the ideating for our article or statement. We can think about who that's going to be for. But in the meantime, go have a quick body break. We will stay on the line. The team will stay on the line. So if you have any questions you'd like to ask of us, please do let us know. And thank you once again for the wonderful engagement and amazing information shared from all our speakers. Thank you, everyone. See you shortly. We'll be back then at 22:12, 11:40. Great, welcome back, everyone. I'm now going to hand over to our NFPs. I believe it's Sinatemba who's going to be walking us through the next stage. Sinatemba, are you there? Brilliant, thank you.
Okay, so I hope we all had a nice break. So now we are moving on to ideating a statement or an article statement. So basically our aim is to address the following 3 questions, which is the impact of climate change on oceans and the environment. Tamsin, please tell me if I'm too fast.
No, I think you're right.
Okay, so that's our first point. So another thing that we need to address is obviously ocean biodiversity. We also need to look at conservation of the ocean and ocean pollution. Okay. And thirdly, we also need to take into consideration environmental management.
Hi, everybody. So my name is Arvar Supol from Youth at Saiia, and I just want to share that the next part of this process is actually putting together a statement/article on today's discussions, but also in celebration or in observance of World Oceans Day. So the next part of this process is us coming together to look at different elements of what the statement or article would look like. And so Sinatemba has so nicely posed 3 wonderful key questions that's going to guide our discussions to highlight what does this statement look like? What do we want to include in it? What are we saying? Who are we sharing it with, etc. So we really invite you all to share your input, your thoughts, comments, anything that you feel would be related to this topic within the chat, or you're welcome to unmute and go through the process as Sinatemba guides us going forward. We do not have a lot of time with the session. We would be wrapping it up in the next few minutes. So we really encourage you all to utilize the chat function for us to go through this process. So yeah, I just want to share that with you all, and I am taking notes as we go along. So yeah, thank you. Sinatemba, back to you.
Okay, so please feel free to even type on the chat box and I'll just read out aloud. Any ideas? So with regards to the first factor that, or the first question that we aim to address, I think we should take into consideration the key threats to, pollution of the environment, of the ocean, I mean. So we need to take into consideration overfishing, population, and habitat destruction. So with regards to ocean biodiversity, conservation, and ocean pollution, I don't know if anyone has any idea with regards to addressing that question, or how we can ensure that we better protect our ocean and prevent any pollution, or any strategies.
Nitimba, maybe let's take a step back. I think let's look at that first thing. This article or statement that we want, or the audience in the room, who do we think we should be writing this piece for? And why would we be writing it in the first place? So I see there's some options there. So either we can share it to the public, so it can be a blog format, and this is to grow awareness around these things, or we can address it to public policymakers to demand action on these. So I'd love to hear from the youth in the room who they think would be the best audience for this and what the point of this would be, because we don't want to just write things for the sake of writing things. We really want it to be intentional and impactful. So why are we doing this and who would be reading at the end? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments on what they think is the best and most effective way to go about this. I see we've also got organizations as an option there. So let's try answer that question. If you have thoughts, we'd really like to hear what your perspectives are in the chat. This is a youth perspective and youth voice that we'd like to come through. Some really nice ideas coming through there from Younger. Thank you for sharing again, Younger. We appreciate your engagement.
Hi
Hey,
everyone.
Tammy, can I come in quickly?
This is Simpiwe, also from Saiia. Just looking at the topics that we're trying to tackle, so overfishing, habitat destruction, pollution, I think that we should also be trying to get this note out to private companies as well, especially private companies that contribute heavily to the pollution in oceans.
I also just wanted to add, if we are writing an article, possibly that could be for the general public, but if we were focusing on writing a policy statement, that could be possibly for whether it be civil societies or like the departments or government, you know. So I just wanted to add that as well.
Okay, so I think we have a few really good recommendations on who this article slash statement would go to in the coming spaces. So I note that there is key questions that we have here, but I encourage we have close to 15 young people in the space right now. The presentations by the various panelists was really remarkable. Before I carry on, Kanyisile, I see your hand. Yes. You're welcome to unmute and speak. Can you see it?
Oh, hi.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. So I just wanted to explain when I said organized development of women and marginalized communities. I think now that Diana has explained how these specific societies can be impacted by climate change and things that affect the ocean, maybe we could add that in our like sort of explaining why they should be involved in the change or our efforts.
Okay.
I don't know if I'm saying.
So if I'm getting that correct, you want us to highlight the role that climate change has, and especially climate change in relation to women and children and marginalized communities into the statement.
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, we can definitely add that. Could I ask you if you could just make a note in the chat and we can copy that the way you see or envision it, and we can obviously edit it going through that process. But yeah, so just thank you, Kanyisile, for that input. So we've highlighted again who the article slash statement would like to go to and how we'd like to approach this statement slash article. I'm going to say, Sina Temba has really so nicely outlined three key questions in this process. Do we feel like from the panelist discussions and from these questions, are there any particular pillars or themes that you are noticing in relation to this topic that you feel this statement or article should highlight very strongly? You know, we have these questions in itself highlighting different elements or different themes and pillars that we could base the statement on. So I'm going to quickly open the floor, just not to take too much of time. You're welcome to pop a message on a theme or pillar that you feel stands out to you, and we can just highlight some elements to that in and around this statement. Nomcebo.
In my case, I think another pillar needs to be communication. I think it was brought up by the panel, but communicating science information into a colloquial language that people can understand. So, for example, with the tornado that recently hit KZN, I'm sure judging by African backgrounds, people can think that, oh no, maybe God is angry or maybe ancestors are angry, but it's actually the result of the climate change, the climate crisis. So just to prompt them to see that this is actually happening right now and it's not just something that's being made up. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Nomcebo. Appreciate the input. Yeah. Okay, so academic language in and around ocean, scientific ocean spaces, that's definitely there. Quinns?
Just to come in again, thank you so much, Bavash. As Nomcebo also noted, and also what Younger also noted was that, you know, women in coastal areas, they have their own indigenous knowledge when it comes to climate and issues of the weather and everything that is related to like their environment, right? So I think that could also be a possible pillar, like indigenous knowledge when it comes to women in coastal areas as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Quinns. That's really, really a wonderful point, especially in this conversation. So yeah, indigenous knowledge. Any other themes? I mean, there's climate change, there's ocean biodiversity and conservation. Pollution, that could also just be a theme instead of just a key question. Environmental management, these are elements, but I'm not dictating the statement. I really would like to open the floor to you who has joined us today to share what your feel would be in the statement. Final call for any responses, any comments, thoughts?
Yes. So in the chat, I also put a thought on the financing for the blue economy in terms of the Paris Agreement. Is that something we want to look at as a pillar? Especially coming from Global South.
Thank you, Cynthia, for that input. I promise I know how to spell. Okay, so in the interest of time, I know the session went a little bit over time, but in the interest of time, you're always welcome to add points to the chat, and I will happily, gladly put them into the document for you. Donovan also added a point, finding connections with people related to oceans. Could we add this under indigenous knowledge as a point? Perfect, thank you. So that's all from my side. Sorry, Zinatemba, you're welcome to take back the reign.
Can I just say, with that, including it in indigenous knowledge, also actually have it as its own, because there could be people who aren't indigenous to it but have knowledge on it.
Okay. Okay, so just in the interest of time, I think this document or the statement is still just, we're in the initial phases, and it's going to obviously go forward, and obviously we'll have to take shape. But yeah, Senior Timber has gladly added questions to prompt you all, if you would like to add input to this document, we can move that space forward. Quince, I'm going to hand over to you. I know you're the next person on the program in regards to the next steps forward, and I'm happy to share whatever else needs to be after you. So yeah, you're welcome to take the floor.
Do I come in right now or?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Snetemba. I was wondering if possibly the participants could possibly write in their details within the chat box so that we are able to contact you and share the Google document in which we were typing all the notes for today with you. Thank you so much, everyone who presented or not presented, but rather shared their ideas and suggestions with regards to drafting a possible policy statement or an article for World Oceans Day, mainly focusing on this year's theme of catalyzing action for our oceans and climate. Just in the interest of time, I would like to indicate the following points for moving forward in terms of drafting the policy statement or article. We have noted your inputs and ideas on the Google document, which will be shared with those who would be interested in assisting in drafting the possible policy statement or article, right? We kindly request that you refine this document by editing it and adding your suggestions to the document as well, and adding more detail as to what you would like to see in the possible policy statement or article. Then we request that you kindly send through or submit this document by Friday next week, which, if I'm not mistaken, is the 14th of June. So can you please submit back the edited Google document to us? We will go through the document and schedule a drafting session with the volunteers who'd be interested in drafting the policy statement or the article. And the finalized article or statement will be reviewed, published, and sent out to the relevant departments. Thank you so much, Arvash. Thank you.
Thank you, Quinn. So yes, to all those that are joined us, just to reiterate very nicely what Quinn has just shared, I will be sending a follow-up email after the event today with 2 links. You're going to get a Google document link where you happily can share your thoughts and inputs to any of the points by next week, Friday, 14th of June. I'm going to send a WhatsApp group link. And if you would really like to champion and be a part of this process, and if oceans and ocean biodiversity and climate change are really something you're passionate about, join the WhatsApp group so you can be a part of the editing process going forward. This means refining the content on the document, putting it into a nice statement, making it flow. If you have skills in that capacity, we invite you to join this process. We like all our statements to be as youth-led as possible. So you will receive that email by the end of today, and you can happily join both the spaces, and all the information needed from today's session is going to be there. And we look forward to having you all a part of the drafting and editing process. So that's all from Quinns and me. Thank you. Tamsin, back to you.
Thank you so much, Arvash. Really, really appreciate it. Are there any questions before we wrap up today? Is everyone happy? Any thoughts, comments, or questions you'd like to share at this stage? I'll take silence as a good thing, but you're always welcome to reach out to any member of our team or email us at youth@saiia.org.za if you do have further questions. But thank you so, so much again for taking the time to attend today's webinar, whether you're an attendee or panelist. We really appreciate you being here, and we really wish you a happy World Oceans Day for tomorrow. Thank you so much for your efforts, and we look forward to seeing you at our next event. So please do follow us on our social media, Youth at Saiia. Please do go fill in those surveys that Michelle shared and share any community projects you know about or success stories that you know about in an oceans context. Thank you, everyone.